welcome to Why Testing is Hard, Estimating Impossible, and We All Feel Like Fraud Sometimes. We're starting the normal talks with something real light, just to get us warmed up. Sorry if this talk is a little bit heavy today, although it will not be heavy on the technical side, more on the emotional side. So first, who am I? I'm Fritz, formerly of the Vue.js core team. And before I got into tech, I actually didn't care too much about technology. I was mostly focused on education, psychology, linguistics. That was my training. That's what I did. And I got into tech because I wanted to build things to help me do those things better, to help me with my education mission. And I still, after I started earning most of my money from tech, I used it as a way to fund the projects that don't make a lot of money. I don't know if anyone knows this, but there's not a lot of money in education. So, and I still like to build tools to help myself and also help companies who are using those tools. This is me. I wasn't sure if I was going to have to wear a mask while I was up here, so I wanted you to be able to see my face. Fortunately, I can use my full emotional expressions. This is me in my pod, and we got through going outside a lot. You can see playing a lot of puzzles, and like I said, like I warned, this is going to be some real talk today. We're going to talk about some things that are sometimes going to be a little bit comfortable, definitely very real, and I hope real in a way that you find helpful. I think it's only fair for me to be vulnerable first. I failed. I've worked for many years now as a consultant, international consultant, helping companies, often really big companies all around the world, with big problems, solve their technical problems on their teams. And I've also done a lot of workshops. With the consulting, I've been more successful, but in my workshops, to try to teach people how I do what I do when I'm consulting, because one of my values is to always make yourself redundant if you can. If I can make it so that people don't even have to hire me, then that's wonderful. I can work on more interesting problems. But most of the people who went to my workshops and learned about a lot of technical solutions that I offered for improving their estimates, for improving their processes, for improving their testing, when I followed up, some said, oh yeah, it's working great, we love it. We've never been happier. But most said, yeah, we didn't even really get to that point. We're still stuck. It didn't work. We never even tried the tool. We're still not sure what to focus on in testing. And that was hard. That was hard for me, figuring out what to do with that feedback. And when I looked into it, it turned out the reasons things were failing was not because the technical tips that I was sharing. And if you all came here for technical tips, I've got lots of talks online talking about technical tips for testing and things like that and estimating. So you can go see one of those. But in this one, I'm going to show you the stuff that I really wish that I had focused on first, before the technical stuff, which is the emotions. And before I go into that, I want to talk about what are the emotions that estimating brings up. And this is a question for you. So go ahead, raise your hands. If you are willing to be vulnerable enough here with me and all of us, say, what are some of the emotions that come up around estimating? When someone asks you, how long is this going to take? Go ahead.
I'm totally not going to hold you to this.
Yeah.
Can you just dartboard it for me?
Dartboard it for you? Like someone asks you for, I'm not sure I understand the question. Like you have a task, you're assigned a task, and someone asks you, how long do you think this will take? Is it going to be a day? Is it going to be a week? What are the emotions that come up for you? Yeah, go ahead.
Anxiety.
Anxiety? Anxiety too? Anxiety about what? What are you afraid of?
Wasting business resources and time.
Why do you care about wasting business resources? Because it makes what?
It makes you look bad.
It makes you look bad. And why do you care about looking bad? Because you might not get your contract renewed, so there's your like physical safety might be threatened. Also, your relationships with your colleagues, with your boss, with a client. Yeah, go ahead.
Equipment, but usually they just want to start work, yes, but then they're going to hold me to it and they're going to whip me with it.
So you're afraid that you're going to give them a guess. And you're going to tell them, like, listen, I can't really give you a specific estimate. And then you're going to say, or they're going to say, well, just give us the number anyway. And I say, 2 weeks. It's like, but I really don't know. That could be way off. And then when it's still not done in 2 weeks, they say, why was your estimate so off? Yeah. And then you feel like you're being punished for giving them what you already told them you couldn't give them, for not giving them what you knew you couldn't give them and communicated that. And what about with testing? What kind of emotions come up with testing? Yeah, go ahead. Uncertainty? Yeah. Uncertainty and fear, maybe? Because testing is real hard.
And there's 1,000 things you can test, and especially when you're reporting to someone else, you don't know which ones they want you to test.
Yeah, where do we even start? You don't know what's going to break. Hopefully none of it. I mean, that's what you planned for. You didn't write code planning like, well, I think this will break later. I mean, maybe you think that, but you hope it's not true. And you try to code it so that it doesn't. So sometimes there are some pieces of code that you're worried about even looking at. You ever had the areas of your code where someone's saying, okay, so who wants to work on this services layer here? And everyone just kind of either looks down or looks at each other. And then someone finally says, I think Linda wrote that. Yeah, but Linda left. It's scary. And if you don't even understand it, and what it's supposed to do, because often that's not very well documented, how are you going to write tests for it? And you also might be fearing some, like, gosh, when I talk to some of my friends, they have some test frameworks that they're really excited about, and I want to be one of the cool people testing too. You also might just want to destroy the entire code base and quit your job. A lot of feelings come up, a lot of different, often conflicting feelings. Like you want to give, like when giving estimates, for example, you want to give an estimate that's low enough that people think is like, oh, wow, that's great. That sounds wonderful. I mean, you want to please the people that you're working with. You don't want to say, oh yeah, I think that'll take 3 months, and they just look at you like, what, are you lazy or stupid? That would feel horrible. That would feel really horrible. So I think it's important to think of these problems first as emotional, then as technical. And I've resisted this so much, but I've learned it the hard way over and over and over again. Just like Steve Setzler, NASA guy who was just here, he was saying you have to have teams that listen to each other. And part of that listening is listening for the feelings. Because we love and we want so badly to just have the right answer. But the truth is that all code is compromise. All code is compromise. Are you going to do, 6 months of research to find, the perfect library for this specific job? Or are you going to actually ship eventually? It's all compromise. You decide what you're going to focus on, how much you allow yourself, the different parts of you that want different things, to guide the direction to get you to where you want to be. And before we go any further, I think it's really important to define what are emotions. Like in cognitive science, when we talk about emotions, instead of using the word emotion, often the word dispositional representations are used. Because that's what emotions do. Emotions are some kind of representation that dispose you to particular kinds of action. So you come across this situation, some cues in your environment, in your body, and a little voice in your head says or just urges you with chemicals like, hey, let's go in this direction. Let's respond in this way. Let's just hide because we don't want anyone to assign tests to us. Let's fight because we're afraid that we're going to be in a situation where we're asked to test something and then we'll end up not being able to do it because it's scary. There's a lot of uncertainty. You don't know if you'll be able to do it. And it's really a separate skill set from normal development. And a lot of people outside of developers don't recognize that. Even a lot of developers don't acknowledge it. So it's important to note that every emotion evolved to direct you to action that either protects you from danger or guides you to opportunity. And which one do you think is more important? Which emotions do you think you tend to pay more attention to? The ones that protect you from danger or guide you to opportunity? And you can just shout out loud. Danger, yeah. Because if you dead, not a lot of opportunity. That's real important. You got to stay away from danger. And danger is not just survival. Danger is maintaining standing in your social groups. Danger is maintaining access to resources like money for your job so that you can have house and food and health care. So we like to think of ourselves as these, really stable, consistent individuals. But really, we're a bunch of dispositional representations in a trench coat that are all arguing with each other, competing with each other, and being moderated by what are called critics in cognitive psychology, although I think that's a kind of a weird name because it's not just critical voices, but deciding what to pay attention to. We really are a lot of different people, and you've probably had moments where you thought to yourself, wow, I wasn't even myself. You were yourself, just not that part of yourself that you're thinking of right now, that you're in at that moment. There are probably times when you've been mad in a meeting at a coworker or with a partner, and you're wrong. There's a part of you that knows you're wrong at a certain point, but you keep on arguing, and there's another voice in your head saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? Just be quiet. Shut up. What are you? Oh my gosh, you're making it worse. What? Be quiet. I give up. Well, another part of you can't stop because they're scared. And they don't know how to meet that need except through this. And that voice, just telling them to stop, isn't offering them any other alternative to meet the needs that they're worried about, aren't even interested in the needs that part is worried about. So typically, there are a lot of exceptions, but most people are not great at noticing conflicting emotions from different parts of ourselves, negotiating with those parts. Instead of just saying, shut up, what are you doing? Noticing it and saying, what's going on? What are you worried about? What's the fear? What's the concern here? What are you worried about happening? What do you want to happen? And having those parts negotiate with each other, which might sound a little bit strange, but it does work, and there's a lot of clinical work that shows very well that it works. And talking about emotions. There's a client, this is one of my favorite moments in I think my entire career, where I was doing some work to try to help him understand where, and to help myself understand where a lot of his fears were coming from, because there were some things I wasn't getting that were blocking us in the process. I wasn't understanding. There weren't any, as far as I could see, technical blockers, but there was something going on emotionally, like with him and with other members of the team, that I didn't get. And I recognized that as a danger sign. So I started asking him some questions about his feelings, using techniques that I'm going to show you later. And I've been doing that for a few weeks now, and we've been making a lot of progress. And apparently, he had been using the skills that I was modeling at home with his partner, because she came on the video call at one point and said, "Hi, I just want to know, who exactly are you, and how did you get my husband to start talking about his feelings?" Because this is a very logical guy. He's not the feely, touchy type. Now, why notice conflicting emotions? A lot of developers, I think, would like to think of themselves like this. I am incapable of any feeling. I just, stick to logic, and I think this is logically the best decision. And whenever anyone brings up emotion, they shut it down. They say, hey, let's just stick to the facts. Let's just stick to the facts. The emotions in the room are facts too. You can ignore those facts and not get very good results, or you can pay attention to all of the facts and get better results, because those emotions definitely are, telling you something important. They can tell you something important if you listen. And of course, if you do ignore emotions, what happens? Has anyone ever taken a beach ball, when they're out at the beach and they just push it way down underwater, and then you slip? What happens? Shoots right back up, hits you in the face. Emotions work the same way. If you try to push them down, they will shoot up and hit you in the face. I have a friend who, relatively recently actually, was just trying to work so hard, get all this stuff done, optimize all of his free time. Whenever we would talk on a call or something, he'd say, "Yeah, I'm just trying to find more ways to, is playing the ukulele really the best way to get me recharged so that I can do more work?" And everything was in service of just doing more work, being able to do more. And he was treating himself basically like a machine. So he thought he was looking at his emotions, but not really acknowledging his humanity, that he needs more than just recharging so that he can get back to work. Sometimes you need to recharge just for yourself in 4 different parts, just to explore. And if you're paying attention to those parts, those feelings, you can tell when they're sated and you can tell when it's meeting their needs. But it's hard. That takes a lot of work. And then you end up feeling like this. That person ended up, I think, at a critical moment in a sprint, just taking off sick for a week and playing video games. Because he was done. He'd hit his limits. He tried to optimize himself, treat himself like a machine, and then he broke down, like machines do. And started having a crisis, thinking about, like, do I want to quit my job? Is my job the problem? Like, I like the people I work with. I like the stuff I work on. Can I not just be happy doing anything? So how can you identify when you have conflicting emotions? This is pieced together from a bunch of different psychological models that don't compete and sometimes are reworded a little bit to fit together nicely. But I really like this chart. There are 3 kinds of major kinds of needs that we focus on. Autonomy versus connection. We want to be our own selves, but we also want to be close to others. We want to feel cared for. And we want to feel like we have others that we care for. We want to feel useful, valued. And there's power. We want to feel like, we're very competent. We can do a lot of things. And we also want to challenge ourselves. We want to go out and keep growing our skills. And again, for evolutionary reasons, like, this makes a lot of sense. You want safety, and you want novelty. You want to stick with the tech that you're used to, and you want to try out some new stuff. So why negotiate with parts? Has anyone woken up beginning of the day or maybe at the end of the day and just asked themselves in the mirror, why am I the way that I am? Why am I doing this? You don't have to answer. I know it's a very vulnerable question. I have. I mean, that's hard. That's the question you ask when you're not accepting parts of yourself. When there are needs that you have that you're not even allowing yourself to see because it feels dangerous to other parts to see that. And that is even adaptive. Probably in childhood or at other points in life. I'm not going to psychoanalyze everyone in this room. But, we learn these adaptations for a reason. We learn them from our environment. And they work, at least in some contexts. And then they can be used in maladaptive contexts because we don't have any better strategies. And then we end up empty. So to negotiate with those parts, my first tip is to give yourself time. Sometimes that's just time to breathe. I notice a lot of times when someone says something that just immediately activates me. There's some part, and it can take some time to develop that awareness of yourself. Meditation helps, going for walks helps develop that. When I feel activated, I try to automatically now, I've trained myself to just stop, get a pretty neutral face, take a breath, gentle smile, And that gives me a little bit of time to think and observe what's going on without reacting. And of course, just giving yourself time during normal moments, like throughout your day, to just do nothing. If you're constantly receiving stimulation from Twitter and notifications, your brain isn't going to have a lot of space to observe because it'll be waiting for the next thing. I also often find it's helpful to name the parts and why they exist. A partner of mine used to name, this was more of a pattern than a part, when she'd suddenly start like yelling at herself and thinking like, oh gosh, I totally messed everything up. I made everything awkward. They should have never invited me to this meeting. Like, I just totally derailed everything. I'm asking questions that aren't important, and everyone's looking at me like I'm just from Mars. And she has a little voice inside of her that sometimes tells her, like, you're a very small, bad idiot. And when you say it out loud, it sounds a little bit ridiculous. She got it actually from a review for an ice rink. Someone didn't like that ice rink and thought it was a very small, bad idiot. And just noticing that, like, made her laugh. And yeah, there's a part of me that's like really upset with me. What do they want? Like I think they don't want me to be embarrassed. They want me to like pay attention to the social cues of people around me, pay attention to their emotions and what they're needing. So yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. And you can re-regulate in a gentler way, noticing that. But still paying attention to the concern of that part. Any RuPaul's Drag Race fans here? A few? Okay, cool, yeah. I mean, it's great advice. You can't love yourself. If you can't love yourself, how in the hell are you going to love somebody else? You really have to pay attention to your own parts before you can even get to the communication part. Because if you don't have good relationships with your own parts, your own emotions, you're not going to be able to make space for someone else's emotions. What you reject in yourself, you will reject in other people. Now, why talk about emotions at all? What's wrong with avoiding conflict? If anyone's dating right now, like, ghosting is really popular. That's the best way to manage conflict. Just never speak again without announcement. And we do something like that at work a lot too. How many times are there problems that just no one's talking about? With tests, usually people aren't having the conversation that, like, yeah, we're all kind of scared that I'm not going to be able to write good tests. And then, like, we'll have wasted all that time. Or I'm scared that because the deadlines are really important in this company culture, that if I do tests, even if they said they wanted me to do tests, I'll get yelled at for it taking a long time. Whereas they might not even notice if the test isn't there. And if we don't talk about those things, we can't fix it. Again, a lot of people like to stick to the facts when talking about these technical problems. But these aren't technical problems, these are people problems. It's only a technical problem when people are not involved. So these are emotional problems first, and you have to pay attention to the emotions before you can even start talking about the logistics, the tech. A lot of people are scared, yeah, but if we're talking about feelings more, isn't it just going to be longer meetings? Like, Dave already goes on about his weekend for longer than I'd like personally, and no one stops him. It's like, well, if you were talking about your feelings, you could say, hey, Dave, you always have some really good stories about your weekend, but would you mind if we created a channel for weekend stories? Because sometimes I feel a little bit anxious that we'll get through the agenda, and I don't want to delay everybody in their day, and because I know they have other meetings and stuff like that. But I still want to make space for those stories. All those meetings are going to be a lot shorter from now on. And there'll be a space for Dave's weekend stories and anybody else's weekend stories, and they'll have places to talk about it and connect still. Once you start talking about feelings, you can get a lot more efficient. But how to talk about emotions safely? Because again, we're all afraid of it. That's why we avoid it. We avoid it and ghost people and just don't talk about problems. How many people have quit a job without fully communicating to their boss? Actually, I'm more curious about the opposite question. How many people who've quit their job, who when they quit their jobs, always fully communicate to their bosses about why they're quitting and all the problems they have with the company? Any hands? One. Most people don't, because they're afraid. They're afraid that it won't be received well, that it'll just burn bridges, that it won't make any difference anyway. So maybe if we had talked about our feelings, things could have been different. People often don't realize that. There's a dev I know who was really, really nervous about tests. He had never done any testing before, and he didn't want anyone to know that he hadn't done any testing because he thought it was just a normal thing that everyone should know how to do. I mean, he's a senior developer. He should know how to test. But he'd never done any tests before. Well, if you can't talk about it, you're just going to write really bad tests. I encouraged him to talk about it. He talked about it with his boss. And his boss bought him, gave him a stipend for whatever he wanted. I think it was up to $400 of course material and stuff like that and trainings. And then plus another conference that he paid for later to help him become more comfortable with testing and the specific testing tools that they were going to be using. It worked out, but he was afraid he was going to be fired. But it usually doesn't come to that. We're kind of trained that way. In school, you're given, when you do less than 100%, then you get a grade, and that grade haunts you forever, becomes part of your grade point average. Becomes a definition of who you are. In a job, it isn't really like that anymore, but usually our brains haven't really caught up. In most salary positions, they're not going to dock your pay. You might be fired, but usually only in extreme circumstances. Most companies have a lot of incentive to support their employees. So if you ask for taking half time off, additional resources, additional pairing, shorter meetings, and you do it in an emotionally intelligent way, you often get what you want. So my tip for this is Cravo. Cravo is not a robot designed for eating competitions. It's an acronym. And this is taken from a few different therapeutic models that have really high success rates, from everywhere between couples therapy to organizational consulting. So first, clarify feelings with questions. Repeat the feelings to confirm. Acknowledge good intentions. validate what you can, and own your feelings and role. And because we're starting a little bit late, I'm going to go through this a little bit more quickly than I otherwise would. But you can ask some questions, and I'll have my contact information at the end if you want to ask follow-up questions later. So for clarifying feelings with questions, it's amazing how often this step alone will solve a problem. I had one dev that was just really actively hostile to everyone in the team, including myself, but especially me. Really hostile to me. He didn't hire me, but I was hired to come in as a consultant the way he saw it because he wasn't doing his job. And he thought I was there to do what he couldn't. I was there because he was incompetent. That was his fear. I didn't know that. He wouldn't show up to meetings. He'd make excuses. He'd say he was too busy. Finally, I got him in a meeting, and he was ready for me to yell at him because he hadn't been operating. And I just said, "Is everything going okay?" And he just kind of broke. Because he's ready for a fight. He came there for a fight. When I showed genuine concern for his feelings, I asked, "Just everything going okay?" He said, No, like I'm afraid they're going to fire me. And we got everything out in the open. And I told him, "Listen, my job is to make you look good." That's how I see it. My job is to make the developers I work with look good and feel good about their work. So how can I do that? And we never had another problem again. He was great. He was so helpful. And he had so much valuable knowledge, we couldn't have done it without him. And he was ready to quit because he was afraid of being fired. Repeat feelings to confirm. It's important that we understand what the other person is saying. You can even repeat the same words back to them. But just like making them feel heard relieves so much anxiety. You can see people's shoulders suddenly slump in relief when they tell you their feelings. They're not used to having their feelings heard. And you just say, "This is what you're feeling." Nothing else, no judgment, no additional commentary. And they just say, "Yeah, that's what I'm feeling." That's a tip that saved marriages. Acknowledge good intentions. Even when you disagree with someone, like there was a case where someone thought that we should be 100% testing everything. We just realistically didn't have the time or the resources for that. But he kept fighting for it, and he was adamant. And I was in a position where I could have just overridden him and said no. But instead I said, "Listen, I know you want what's best for the team. Like when we have something that isn't tested, that means it might break. And we might not even know it's broken. And that's scary, right? So what are the parts of the app where that's scariest? Like where can we start? Where can we alleviate the most fear? And what we did, as I've doing a lot of apps, is test the things where without that you don't have a business. Can users log in? Can they give us money? Just testing those two things will save you so much peace of mind, give you so much peace of mind. Like, can they log in? Can they give us money? It's okay if they can't log out. That's a minor problem. You can work on that, but you still have a business at least if they can log in and get money. And validate what you can. Validate is very different from verify. You don't have to tell people they're right. If they say, can you believe Michelle is making us work on on this Friday, even though she said she was going to give us this Friday off? You could say like, yeah, you're right, Michelle's a jerk. You can verify their view of reality in that moment. It's probably not going to be helpful. It's just going to heighten their emotions. It's not going to resolve anything. But validating that it makes sense that they feel that way, it's like, yeah, I mean, you probably had plans for Friday. Like, you were looking forward to having that day off, and you've been working hard, to make sure you could get everything done before Friday. And now suddenly things have changed. Yeah, that is a problem. I think it'd be good to talk to Michelle about that and about how you feel and figure out like how we can avoid this happening again in the future. Because, I mean, it sounds like it's worse than not having that day off in the first place, like not even being offered. And own your feelings and your part. A lot of people, especially developers, in conversations, they get very good at a lot of these skills, but they'll say like, oh no, I don't have any particular feelings or emotions about this. I'm just pretty neutral and logical. And there's nothing more frustrating than someone not owning the feelings that they have and then acting passive-aggressively. Like that'll bubble up, it'll beach ball into passive-aggressive behavior, which is especially dangerous if you're in a position of power over anyone. So own your feelings and your role. If they're mad at you, like let's say you're Michelle. Like, they start talking to you, don't try to defend yourself before. You can explain yourself, but don't try to defend yourself. And only explain yourself after owning your part. It's like, yeah, I wish that I had planned better and not offered that day off and then took it back. I don't want to do that again. Like, I don't want to play with your emotions like this and your schedules. Like, your schedules are important to me, and I just messed them up. And that's it. I hope I had some case studies that I was going to go into. I hope that can be enough. I don't think we have very much time for questions. But you can see these slides at slides.com/emotions. And if you have any questions, if you want to follow up with me, I'm happy to send you some resources. Like, I've tried to keep the sort of psychobabble low in this talk. But if you want some additional resources, like with specific research, like this stuff is really kind of the tip of the iceberg. It was really hard to decide what to keep in this talk and what to keep out, because this is so deep. And just Cravo alone, you could practice that for the rest of your life. I think I will, and still learn new aspects of it and get better at it. And make sure the subject line is emotions if you email me, or else it will probably just get lost. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time.